A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you so much for tuning into another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. It is great to have you with us today. Now, I know that I said on Friday's program we're going to be talking about this Secret Service report. Came out just a few days ago and offers all kinds of recommendations and tools, strategies to prevent targeted school attacks. Now, unfortunately, I was not able to get the guest that I was hoping for today. So rather than just me opine, we're going to save that for another day. We do have a couple of updates out of Santa Clarita, California. Police are still searching for a motive in this case, but again, they do say that there were warning signs that apparently this young individual who turned a gun on classmates on his 16th birthday before turning the gun on himself. He passed away over the weekend, by the way. They still don't know exactly how the 16-year-old acquired the firearm that was used. His father was apparently a gun owner, passed away in 2017. Police say they found other firearms there at the home. But again, they're still looking for a motive, although I did see, again, that one of the officers who was quoted said that there were signs. Apparently, this individual had been having some trouble with his girlfriend, who was described as his sort of emotional anchor since the loss of his father in 2017. And that is something that correlates to that Secret Service report that was released. Came out, Secret Service's National Threat Assessment Center conducted this research and wrote this report. It came out, I believe, week before last. And they note that in every one of these targeted school attacks that they examined between 2002 and 2017, and they looked at 41 of them, that every one of those perpetrators had warning signs as well. And the focus of that report is not to recommend new gun control laws or things of that nature. Again, California has every gun control law you could think of on the books. It didn't stop this attack. What this report and what these strategies are all about are about identifying these individuals before they try to take other human lives or before they try to take their own life. And again, based on the data and the research that the National Threat Assessment Center of the U.S. Secret Service has done, they believe that they have found ways to identify these individuals and to get them help before they commit such a heinous act. So we are not forgetting this story. We're not dropping it, but I do want to make sure that we get to that conversation with folks who have been involved in the creation of this report and are being involved in the implementation of the training that's being conducted for law enforcement and educators around the country. Now, one thing that I did ask, and one of the things that I wanted to focus on today, you get to be my company today, as a matter of fact. So I had a piece a few days ago at Bearing Arms talking about some of the unconventional arguments against gun control. Because it's just a fact that for a lot of people who are pushing these gun control laws, including a lot of anti-gun politicians, the constitutional argument doesn't work with them. Either A, they believe that the Second Amendment allows them to pass whatever gun control laws they want, or B, they don't really care what the Second Amendment says. That your individual right to keep and bear arms should not be an impediment to the gun control laws that they want to put in place. I happen to think that there are other arguments we can use beyond the constitutional argument. I don't think we should drop it entirely. I think one of the things that we absolutely need to be doing as Americans right now is talking about the importance of all of our constitutional rights. But beyond that, I think that there are arguments that can be made and conversations that can be had that don't involve specifically as the foundational argument. Well, it's my right to own a firearm, because the other side simply says, well, sure, but not that one, right? And not that ammunition, and not that magazine, and not right. So we can, and again, we go round and round in circles when we have these types of arguments. So I asked you, what are some of your unconventional gun control arguments? And I heard from several of you over the weekend. I posted a piece, but I've also heard from a lot more of you over the past a couple of days since I originally wrote that piece at Bearing Arms. So I wanted to get to some of your responses, because I thought that there were some really good ones and some really interesting ones. Andrew had written in with a argument basically pointing out what happens, or trying to make the argument that alcohol is involved in more deaths than firearms are. You wouldn't try to ban alcohol. I would note that we have tried to ban alcohol in our nation's past, and that did not work out so well, right? Actually led to, now listen, if you were trying to reduce drinking, prohibition was a success. Because according to the data, alcohol consumption dropped by about 1/3 during the time that prohibition was in effect. 1/3. So it did go down. It didn't stop. And everybody who continued to drink was a criminal. It enabled and expanded the illicit market for alcohol, creating a criminal enterprise that far outlasted prohibition, right? But alcohol consumption was reduced by 1/3. So you got that. All right. Also, Brittany writing in and said, my argument isn't so much against laws as it is against some of the propaganda that I see shared by the mass media and social media combined with some personal opinions. I hold on the laws, or some of the personal opinions I hold on the laws. I'll steer clear from the traditional argument of shall not be infringed. In quoting the Federalist Papers, these are important points, but they shut people off, especially when they think that the Constitution is a living, breathing document and not set in stone. The fastest way to shut someone off from talking to you about guns is to quote the Second Amendment. I think that is right, particularly for non-gun owners. Doesn't mean that you can't have these conversations. But in order to get to that point where you can have that conversation about the importance of the Second Amendment and our other individual rights, you do have to, I think, kind of ease your way in, sadly, because there are a lot of people who just don't get it. They don't want to get it. They think, you're talking about rights and I'm talking about human lives. And why are your rights more important than human lives? Well, Brittany says, even with increased legislation, we still have these large-scale events. Why? Because we are treating the effect and ignoring the cause. Right? She says rifles account for 2 to 4% of firearms that are involved in crimes, depending on which study you read. People are quick to note that, quote, you cannot kill as many with a knife, but if you look at China, you know that isn't true. How are so many killed by knives? Because of the tactics that are employed. Brittany says, I hear people constantly state that handguns cannot produce as many casualties. That too is incorrect, as Brittany notes. I live in Virginia. The Virginia Tech tragedy took place here. The killer used 2 handguns. And as a matter of fact, even in these targeted school attacks, that Secret Service report I mentioned a few minutes ago notes that handguns are used far more frequently than rifles. But firearms are only used in a little more than half of these targeted school attacks, back to Brittany's point. Brittany says about 2/3 of gun-related death, suicide. We have 12 to 15,000 annual gun-related homicides in this country, which accounts for roughly 0.005% of the population. Your chances of being a victim drop if you're not involved in criminal activity. As a comparison, the 3rd largest killer in the country takes the lives of 250,000 plus people. Medical mistakes. She's right about that as well. Should we ban doctors? No. But what this should tell people is we literally have bigger issues that are largely ignored. Brittany, I think that's a great point, and it's actually one that I've brought up before. And as it turns out, the biggest thing that you can do if you're a doctor to cut down on medical mistakes and to save lives is to wash your hands. Nurses too, healthcare professionals who are dealing with patients. Biggest thing you can do, wash your hands before you see a new patient. And yet, time and time again, that is not done. Now, hospitals around the country have not demanded laws that would lead to doctors or nurses being arrested if they fail to wash their hands. Instead, they have put in place educational tools, reminders on a constant basis for those healthcare professionals to do the right thing, using positive peer pressure to get doctors and nurses to wash their hands. And I've actually asked some people, well, what do you think about arresting doctors? And I think flippantly, I've gotten some people say, well, it's fine. I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't think that's practical any more than a lot of the gun control proposals that are put forward. Not only do I think they're unconstitutional, But in many cases, I do think they are ineffective and impractical and almost unenforceable. Why not do things that work as opposed to maybe the more emotionally satisfying thing, for at least a gun control advocate, of passing universal background check laws or a sweeping gun ban that can't be enforced? Why not do the things that actually make a difference? Brittany says that it's safe to conclude that the bulk of gun-related homicide not being committed by people who are law-abiding citizens. It's being committed by people who already cannot pass a background check, so they obtain their guns through other sources. Does this mean, Brittany says, we shouldn't have gun laws? No, we should do our best to keep guns away from those who cannot be trusted with them. However, Brittany says, we already have these laws in place. NICS has stopped millions of guns from being sold as of 2014. 2.6 million requests have been denied, so it works, she says. But it can only work when reporting agencies properly report people who cannot possess a gun due to a recent crime that they committed, or due to other prohibitions, right, such as being adjudicated a mental defective. Brittany says we need to consider unsealing juvenile convictions for the purposes of gun sales. She says, I don't support banning them for life, crime dependent, as sometimes people are young and dumb. People make mistakes in their youth only to grow out of it, change, and then become productive adults in society. However, since federally 18-year-olds can purchase a rifle, the records should not be sealed. Perhaps we should use juvenile records as a disqualification until 21 or even until 25. See, again, I think that, Brittany, that's something that you could probably get a lot of support for, particularly when you talk about it not being a lifetime prohibition. You know, we had a story on Bearing Arms last week, actually over the weekend, about a gentleman from New Jersey, one of the many cases of individuals who are caught up in New Jersey's gun laws. So this guy, when he was 19, basically got caught with a joint. I think it was disorderly conduct was the ultimate charge. 5 years later, when he was 24, he had a little bit more serious crime. He ended up leading police on a chase. He had a knife, didn't, try to attack an officer or anything, but refused to drop the knife. It's now been 21 years since those two crimes. The individual in question, who in court papers is known by F.E., the initials, is now a paramedic, has been for about a decade. His criminal record has been expunged in the state of New Jersey. He is actually eligible to be a police officer, but his local police chief will not grant him a firearms ID card so that he can be a legal gun owner. This guy could be a police officer, but because of his local issuing authority, he's not able to exercise his right to keep and bear arms. So he has sued, seeking to have his rights restored since his criminal record has been expunged. So far, the courts have said no, that it doesn't matter if your record has been expunged, and in the eyes of the law, it never really happened. The New Jersey Court of Appeals said, well, just because in the eyes of the law, this never took place, we have evidence that something took place, so the chief can deny you for your ability to keep and bear arms, even though his rights have been restored under law. That to me is amazing. And I think stories like that, Brittany, right along with what you're talking about, are another way to approach these types of topics. I'll give you another example. Michael Bloomberg, who is probably running for president, over the weekend gave a speech in New York City where he apologized for stop and frisk and putting that in practice. I know. After defending stop and frisk ever since he's been the mayor of New York. But now he's running for president. Now the left does not like, quote unquote, over-policing. And so now he has to apologize for the stop and frisk policies that led to the arrest and convictions of many young men of color, simply for possessing a firearm. Yeah. So we get to now have this conversation about Michael Bloomberg is apologizing for enforcing the gun control laws that he wants to put on the books. Because if you have these types of gun control policies and you want them enforced, guess how they're going to be enforced? Just the way Michael Bloomberg enforced them when he was mayor. And he didn't apologize at the time. He didn't apologize afterwards. He decided to apologize now when he's running for president. So again, I think that there's another avenue to talk with non-gun owners about these types of issues. And in terms of the practical effects of these gun control laws. Craig wrote in, and Brittany, thank you so much for writing in. Craig wrote in as well, and he says, the general public agrees we should vaccinate everyone possible to prevent outbreaks of polio, measles, mumps, TB, etc., allowing for those at risk due to uniformity to be protected by herd immunity. We should equally agree to vaccinate, arm and train, everyone with the best equipment they can afford, i.e. modern arms and accessories of all kinds, capacities, quantities, to prevent outbreaks of invasion, mass rebellion, terrorism, gang violence, robbery, assault, allowing for those at risk due to physical or mental infirmity or immaturity to be protected by, quote-unquote, herd immunity. Craig says the second paragraph was the state of affairs in 1787, signing the Constitution, should still be today. So, Craig, I like the argument, particularly when you consider that gun control advocates are talking quite a bit now about violence as a public health epidemic. So the idea of herd immunity based on an armed citizenry, I do like that idea. Now, again, I think when you are talking to people who are not gun owners, you're probably going to have to explain why there's that benefit when you have an armed, trained populace, as opposed to what their first thought would be is, well, then everybody has guns, and that means it's the Wild West, right? So I think you've got a good start, but I think you need to expand on that, because that would be my first response if I were a non-gun owner and I heard somebody say, well, we just need to make sure that as many good people as possible have as many guns as possible so they can, protect themselves and others against, all kinds of nefarious intent. If I'm a non-gun owner, if my first reaction is that, knee-jerk reflexive anti-gun position out of ignorance, that would be my first thought. Well, that just means more people are going to have guns, and that just means that there's going to be more crime. So I do think we need a follow-up there. Robert writing in and says that with all of the talk about a quote-unquote assault rifle ban, I'm surprised that there's not been an article about using that particular rifle for wild hog hunting. The AR-15 is an extremely versatile hunting tool. The whole debate does not make much sense. We have a major wild hog issue in America that causes over $1.5 billion in damage every year, and it's only getting worse. With a high rate of fire and high-capacity magazines, the AR-15 becomes a very important tool to control this issue. I personally use my AR-15 to hunt hog in large numbers. My binary trigger saves time and gives me the opportunity to take out as many hogs as I can with well-placed shots. As far as I'm aware, says Rob, I'm not aware that there's a rifle as capable as the AR-15 when it comes to hunting wild hogs or any other nuisance animals in numbers. I just don't see anyone hunting wild hog in the numbers that need to be culled with a lever or bolt action rifle that only holds 5 to 8 rounds, and I don't see how a handgun can accomplish this feat. So, Rob, it's interesting. I think that you're right about this. Now, two things. One reason why you haven't probably heard as much about this is that there was a meme that went around. You may or may not have seen this, but somebody on Facebook, I think it was, several months ago, brought up this argument in favor of AR-15s and said, I want an AR-15 to be able to protect my kids because my kids where I live can be playing outside, and the next thing you know, 20 to 30 feral hogs are running around my yard, and I need to be able to drop them before they can hurt my kid, which is not necessarily the best argument. And it ended up being mocked. I think 20 to 30 feral hogs has actually become sort of a phrase now that people use online to kind of mock the idea of gun ownership. So I think it kind of backfired a little bit. Now, having said that, and here's the other, I think here's the other problem with the argument. And I'm not saying it's a bad argument, but here's just something you got to consider. I live in rural America. I have used AR-15s to hunt. And we don't have wild hogs, by the way, but I will tell you the last time we actually processed 8 of the hogs that we raised, we did use an AR-15 when it came time to put them down. It was the fastest, easiest way to do it without them escaping or, being hurt. So we did use an AR-15. So I get it, and I understand the argument, but most Americans don't live in a place where feral hogs are an invasive species, and are creating havoc. And so when you talk about this very real issue, it is almost a hypothetical to those folks who are hearing this message, who may live in a big city, who have never been around feral dogs, who don't really understand. They don't know where their food comes from most of the time. So the idea of them, these hogs, so yeah, it's just a pig, just catch the pig, right? I think that there's a mental block sometimes, and so I don't disagree with your argument, but I don't know how persuasive it would be. All right, let's get to a couple more. By the way, the email address is cam.edwards@bearingarms.com. I do appreciate you writing. This is fun, actually. I've been hoping to do one of these types of shows, and I'm glad we get the chance to do it today. Cliff writing in, he says, I never hear anyone mention the idea or concept of militia. King George tried to disarm the colonists. Is it so unpatriotic that the people should be prepared to stand against tyranny? Do you not remember the national seal that both Franklin and Jefferson wanted? If the government takes our guns, we'll be unable to stand against its tyranny. But as we all know, those that govern know best. Well, I think that's, again, Cliff, I think it goes back to the idea that we are the unorganized militia, right? And that is just a simple fact of law. But most Americans, sadly, and this speaks to a much broader issue, most Americans are fairly ignorant of their own U.S. history. And I would say that goes for a solid foundation in civics as well. And I do believe that needs to be fixed. I do believe that needs to be corrected. I don't think it happens overnight. And in the meantime, again, we have to work with what we have, which is a large number of Americans who, when you bring up the militia or you bring up Jefferson or you bring up Franklin, will kind of roll their eyes and say, yeah, but that was so long ago. We don't live in 1787 anymore. We don't necessarily have to follow what the Constitution said back in 1787 or what the Second Amendment said back in 1791, because it's not 1791 anymore. So we need to change, and the Second Amendment needs to grow and become relevant in 2019. And so that's why we need to limit these quote unquote, battlefield weapons of war. I mean, that's the typical argument, right? When you start bringing up 1787, 1791, or the Federalist Papers or the Second Amendment, or shall not be infringed. So I think that we're not there. I think that there's a great argument to be had about, self-preparedness and being able to protect yourself and your family against all kinds of things, not just, domestic and foreign threats, but, I think that there's a general quote unquote prepper argument to be made for a greater self-reliance and even greater community reliance. But again, I'm not sure we're there yet. Let's see. Cassandra writing in, longtime reader. Says Cassandra, you've asked for arguments, but the more important thing is an effective argument. Long-winded rants don't work. So here's one that will. I do agree with that too, by the way. There's a phrase called the elevator pitch in show business. What's your elevator pitch? So you got 30 seconds. You're on an elevator with a studio executive. You want to get your big idea across to them. What do? Well, you don't start laying, okay, and then in episode 3, about 15 minutes in, right? You don't have that much time. You got 30 seconds. The elevator's going up. So what is your brief best argument? And here is Cassandra's elevator pitch for the right to keep and bear arms and against these gun control laws that we are seeing pushed here. Why do you gun control advocates dislike women, the elderly, the infirm, the minorities so much that you would take away the right to defend themselves? And the only thing that stands between a helpless victim and rule by brute force is the ability to deploy counterforce of at least equal or greater effect. Phrased simply, the way women, the elderly, and infirm maintain their equal rights, including the right to refuse to be a victim, is through the force of arms. We will never, ever have enough police to protect every single individual person. And if you've been paying attention, the courts have ruled that there's no individual right to police protection. People of smaller stature or who are outnumbered or infirm must rely on guns for protection because they don't have any other effective kind. But you apparently hate women, the elderly, the infirm, and minorities and want them to be victims. What is wrong with you? I did change Cassandra's last line, which was actually, what kind of sick bastards are you? I would find, Cassandra, that somebody called me a sick bastard, I'd probably shut down, right? And I also think, too, in your argument, the one thing that I missed was where minorities fit in with your argument. I think that you are absolutely right about equal force. In fact, on Bearing Arms, actually, no, I didn't write about this case at Bearing Arms, but this is a local story not too far away from me. I think it might have been, you know what, it was one of our recidivist reports here on Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Case out of Louisa County, Virginia, where an 82-year-old man brutally murdered, sawed-off shotgun blast to his face. His wife was shot, left for dead, 16-year-old suspect. This is, I think, a perfect example. And in Virginia, as I said at the time, you've got lawmakers that their response to crimes like this is, well, let's make it harder for the 82-year-old and the 73-year-old wife to be able to legally protect themselves. Meanwhile, they don't do anything about the 16-year-old who illicitly acquired a firearm, who used that firearm in the commission of a crime while he was already on probation for other crimes. Right. And so I think you want to talk about, again, the police don't have a duty to protect you as individuals. That's evident in this particular case. You can also talk about the failures of the system, because there are many. That's one of the reasons why we do a segment each and every day here on this program that focuses on the failures of the criminal justice system, because we do need better enforcement of the existing laws. So the one thing, like I said, Cassandra, the one thing that I didn't hear in that argument was how these gun control laws impact minorities. They do, absolutely. New York City is a perfect case in point. While Michael Bloomberg's out there, with his mea culpas for stop and frisk, the gun laws are still on the books in New York. Emily Bazelon at Slate did a podcast. It's been probably 4 or 5 months ago now. She actually has a book that she wrote about this as well, where she went to the Brooklyn gun court every day for 2 months, looking at who was being charged with this felony possession of a firearm without a license in New York City. This was a misdemeanor until the New York SAFE Act was passed. Then it became a felony level offense. The vast majority of charges of SAFE Act violations are coming from New York City, not upstate. And so the vast majority of individuals who are being charged are young men of color. And as Emily Bazelon reported when she was there, the cases that she witnessed, 70% of them, she said, were young minority males without any serious criminal history, who were going to be sent to prison for 3.5 years for simply possessing a handgun without a license in New York City. Something that, by the way, is perfectly legal in most places across the country. Right? In Virginia, you can open carry without a license. We don't have any gun license to own a firearm. There's no firearm registration. So what is perfectly legal and constitutional in most states is a felony in New York City. And again, there is very much a disparate impact on young men of color. And I think that is the case with almost every gun control law out there. So how do these champions of criminal justice reform actually try to deal with that? All right. Anyway, I appreciate to each and every one of you who wrote in. We're going to do this more often because this is fun. And I do like the interactive part of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. And so we will be doing more of these types of, write-in and reader responses. But if you ever want to shoot me an email, you ever got a question, cam.edwards@bearingarms.com is the email address. Give me a couple of days to respond, and I'll do my utmost to get back to you as quickly as possible. But I'm honest with you. I'm not so great about answering emails in a timely fashion. I really try, but it might take me a couple of days. But I do read each and every one. So cam.edwards@bearingarms.com. That is the email address. And now, what do you say we get to today's Armed Citizen story, our recidivist report, and our good deed of the day? We will start with our recidivist report, a story out of Wisconsin Now, this headline's a couple of days old. This was the first headline. Man charged for kidnapping and sexual assault that triggered a police chase. So this individual, well known to authorities as it turns out, 51-year-old Jeffrey Morgan Groves, back on November the 3rd, broke into an elderly woman's home in St. Louis Park outside of Minneapolis, raped her multiple times, forced her to go with him to 2 ATMs to withdraw cash for him. At one point, he untied her. He took off a pillowcase that was over her head. She recognized him as a former handyman. According to the criminal complaint, he was smoking what he said was methamphetamine. He actually returned the woman to her home in the early morning hours, went inside with her saying that he, quote, needed a drink, drank some wine in her home, collected all of her bedding, the wine bottle, the glass, and then left. He apologized to the woman as he left for raping her and told her that, quote, Satan made him do it. So police executed a search warrant on November the 7th. They found several pairs of pantyhose with a crotch cut out, a meth pipe. They found the woman's bedding in his apartment. November 13th, they tried to arrest him during a traffic stop, but he ended up taking off and was actually injured in the crash that took place after the pursuit. He is currently in critical condition. A couple days ago, KARE reported that he had a, quote, lengthy criminal history that includes disorderly conduct, violating restraining orders, and drunk driving. They followed up that original report with a story that focused more on his criminal history over the weekend. They talked with a couple of individuals who've dealt with this guy in the past. One of them, a man named Jeff Lillimo, who 9 years ago filed a restraining order against Groves. He said, I didn't want him coming after me or anything. I was afraid for my safety. One of his friends was dating Groves. They broke up. He said Groves' mood swings were, quote, horrible. It's pretty scary when you have to make sure all your doors and windows are locked so somebody doesn't break in. Groves' criminal history, according to KARE, both before that incident and after, is lengthy with, quote, many convictions for assault, burglary, domestic abuse, and violations of protection orders against multiple women. And yet, Groves was still out on the street despite multiple probation violations and a guilty plea this summer. He was out on bond for his latest crimes, had skipped a court hearing. And as Lillimo says, I don't understand how, if somebody has got this much of a record, why they keep getting let go. The next time, if it happens again, there might be a death. I don't know. Well, the reason why it keeps happening is because of the way the criminal justice system is currently structured. And it doesn't matter how many convictions you might have. If a judge says, I don't really think that you're a high risk of fleeing, I don't think that you're a risk to the community, you're going to get let out on bond. There is a move right now within the criminal justice reform movement to end cash bond. And so either people get out or they don't, which results in more people getting out than not. And I happen to believe would likely exacerbate the issues that we're already seeing here. But until the criminal justice system treats repeat violent offenders like the serious threats to recidivism that they are, then yes, you are going to see career criminals get out, even though they might be facing charges, even though they might be facing charges for, committing crimes while they were out on probation before or out on bond from a previous crime. It is ridiculous, and it does need to stop. And Minnesota is another one of those states where, the lawmakers in charge seem more interested in promoting more gun control than actually tackling the issues in the criminal justice system. All right, our armed citizen of the day. From North Carolina, check out this headline. North Carolina homeowner with a gun confronts a suspect with an axe. That's right. We actually had a story last week about somebody who used an axe in self-defense, or maybe that was a sword. But this is from Burlington, North Carolina. Suspect identified as 29-year-old William Lawrence Cowan on Sunday morning tried to enter the back door of a home there in Burlington. He had an axe that belonged to the homeowner. The homeowner had a shotgun that belonged to himself as well, pointed the shotgun at Cowan, causing him to, quote, leave the axe behind and run away from the house. Cowan was arrested about 2 blocks away without incident. Right now, he's being charged with breaking or entering a building with intent to commit a felony. He's being held in the county detention center on a $5,000 bond. The shotgun-owning homeowner, safe and sound, nobody injured, like the vast majority of defensive gun uses in this country. And hopefully that suspect will actually get treated seriously by the criminal justice system, although I am not holding out much hope for that. All right, on to our good deed of the day. An off-duty Indiana trooper able to help rescue a child who had fallen through a lake. This was Winona Lake, Indiana. Trooper Jacob Bill says he was off duty on Friday afternoon. He was in his Indiana State Police car when he saw local police there in Winona Lake driving by, lights on. He followed him to a retention pond and saw what was going on, actually ran into that water to save the child. He and the boy got tangled up in broken ice. That's when Winona Lake officer Dave Swain got into the water to help the pair. Another Lake Winona officer helped all three get to shore. Jacob Bill said, "I was just glad that I was in the right place at the right time." Boy taken to a local hospital, was treated and released. There was another child that had been playing on the ice, able to get out of the water on his own before officers arrived. So no serious injuries. And again, in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. We thank that trooper, Jacob Bill, in Winona Lake, Indiana, for his very good deed. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. Thank you for keeping me company today. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. And in the meantime, don't forget, you can subscribe to the podcast at Spotify, Stitcher, townhall.com podcast page, as well as Apple Podcasts. Also, Town Hall Media at YouTube. And don't forget, you can become a VIP member of Bearing Arms. You can get exclusive content available to subscribers only, as well as one-on-one editor chats and more. You can find out more information. Just click the VIP section at bearingarms.com. Have a great rest of your Monday. We'll see you back here soon with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company.